Welcome to Artist Talk Season 2, and today we have Nahlaa Tabbaa with us to start off this amazing lineup. If you would like to know who is also part of this season, please check out my Instagram. I have a post there with online artists that will be happening from March all the way to June, every other Monday. And I just wanted to take the time to thank everyone who's been here either from the start or people that are just joining us here today, and to familiarize yourself with the platform that you're currently on. It's called Artist Talks. It's an independent platform that's created and run by myself. And I organize and present talks with creatives based in and or affiliated with the UAE. And we're going to have a biannual series, one in the fall and the other in the spring, which is currently happening now. And I launched it back in April 2020 to provide a forum to initiate conversation, share practices, and to freely ask questions in an informal yet supportive learning environment. And all these talks are recorded and act as an archive on my YouTube channel. So for anyone that would like to go back and to see any of the other artists that have already been on here, you're more than welcome to. And the link is on my Instagram. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our wonderful artist today. Nahlaa Tabbaa is an artist, an educator, and culinary ethnographer, and she's interested in urban research, materiality, and alchemy, she works within these realms to create social impact. And I first got to know Nahla from her work with Alchemy of Dying, and I was so honored and to be able to be part of the workshop that we had a few weeks ago. So to actually meet her in person, not just online with these unusual circumstances. And we also worked on Forsa School together, where we spoke about these digital platforms, and Artist Talks was featured on that as well. So yeah. We're gonna, we normally have questions at the end, but today we're gonna do things just a little bit differently. We'd like this to be as generative and as much of a discussion as possible. So anyone that would like to unmute, feel free to, and we'd like to make it as much of a discussion. So yeah, thank you so much, and Nahla, take it away.
Sarah, thank you so much, and thank you everyone so much for attending. It makes me a lot less nervous to see familiar faces, so that's wonderful. And as Sarah mentioned, we met over very funny circumstances, but Sarah, I've been very impressed by your work and what you've been producing in terms of providing a platform like this, so thank you. And I will start, and like we said, just feel free to jump in, or we'll keep questions to the very end. I'm gonna start by, so when we gave a title to this talk, it was this idea of observing that in my career, I've designed schools or platforms that are either educational, collaborative, immersive, and how that found its way into my practice. Now, a little bit about myself. Before I was born into the UAE's world, I grew up in Jordan. I studied fine art and then curatorial practice. And in my very formative years in Jordan, I grew up in the countryside. I took care of a lot of gardens. My main friends in life were plants and animals. That was it really, and going to school. One of the most difficult experiences for me was actually leaving the countryside to move into an urban environment, and I've only been living in urban environments ever since. In order to adapt and make the most of it, I had to form my own methodology of how to map a city, how to engage with it, how to appreciate it, how to kind of mirror the symbiosis that I was experiencing and encountering in the countryside. I need to elaborate even further. I grew up among wild gardens. I grew up understanding edible wildlife. I learned at a very early age how to work with hydroponic systems, aquaponic systems, and how that that kind of gave me a method as to how I practice in general. And when I moved to the UAE, I was invited to take care of the SAF Urban Garden. So this is a community garden that Sharjah Art Foundation had built. And somehow, apparently, my expertise meant that I would work on very complex programming over there, where I had to do a few things. I had to boost audience engagement. I had to just think about the locality of things a little bit more, tie in the different exhibitions to what was ultimately going on in Sharjah. Quite often, I would notice visitors would come to Sharjah for openings or events, but often bypass all the details that were sort of sitting in between. And this had been a very important role for me to play, and something that I had been working on even when I was in Jordan. In Jordan, the scene felt very dislocated. Artists, quite often found themselves in this corner where they were underrepresented, misrepresented. They didn't have enough opportunities unless their practice fell into a certain framework. And yet I really believed from the start that we had a bigger duty to play. Sorry, my cat, she always does this. So just give me no, she's just sulking. I knew this would happen. I was even telling Sarah earlier that she'll find the time when I'm like,
it's just about cats and artists together, so we're good.
In Jordan, I think my career shifted as a decision because I felt like we're not playing roles in terms of a civic responsibility or an autonomy in our environments. We were either practicing at home and then really bothered by the government's lack of just putting together a city, let's say, or really organizing it, or really giving people the inspiration to be part of an environment. So these are things that I carried with me on my way to Sharjah Art Foundation, and it was there where I built the community program, and then it was there that I started to kind of build on all the other things that I've been doing in the last 7 years. And I guess my method in terms of everything that I do is this idea of one needing to roll up their sleeves, be very confrontational about the roles they're playing in the urban world, that everything needs to be generative. Whatever I learn, I continue to give it back. I'm not necessarily attached. It happens as well with my relationship with materials too. They are not, I kind of play this dance with them, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And it's just this idea of adding value to even the most minor participants. So the way I conduct a children's workshop is very similar to how I would launch a full-on critical program, but it's the same amount of effort that I give to a meal that I'm making or something that I'm making in a ceramic studio. This is just a mind map of what I used to feel was very complex in how I was operating. I get asked the question of how do you do so much? How do you keep up? And it took a while for me to really appreciate and comprehend that somehow everything that I was doing was tying into very similar facets. And so if I look at the strands of my practice, I work in the realm of food and ethnography. I work in the realm of making, in a sense, community and wellness. And yeah, I mean, if there's anything anyone would like to add to this, this is just, I felt it was important to kind of create a map of the different things that I do. What I'll be talking about today, though, are a few projects that sort of led me to have a pedagogical or an educational outlet. So I'll start off with Alchemy and a project that was commissioned by Campus Art Dubai, which eventually led, I mean, during the pandemic as well, as a way to find myself trying to stay afloat and not just harp over a lost opportunity with my artwork, but actually see where I can develop it further. I'm going to speak about Forsa School. We just concluded our first iteration 2 weeks ago. So I'll be talking about the method with that. I'll be talking about my culinary approach as well, and then the making stuff. So a few things that I make on the side that tend to take the back burner because I don't know, I don't give it enough credit, I guess.
Nahla, and also when you speak about these different projects, if you could give us like a timeline about when they started or when you were interested in, that would be great.
For sure. Also, I can't see the chat room, Sarah, so forgive me if I'm not really,
no,
I wonder.
I was just saying, if anyone wants to unmute and like have a comment, they're more than welcome to. I'll be in charge, don't worry.
Okay, so this was 2 years ago. I've been living this very cluttered lifestyle for a while. And I took 2 weeks off to go to the Princess School of Traditional Arts in London. I did 2 courses there. One was in how Socrates and Plato mapped the planets. I just decided I really, that was very necessary for me to learn, but ultimately what I was looking for was to play with sacred geometry. I also was taught how to illuminate manuscripts, particularly looking at fantastical beasts that were mentioned in the Quran. So that was hugely exciting for me. And we spent a lot of time burning calories, concentrating on using a compass and a pencil and a ruler and just measuring things out all day, every day for 2 weeks. And that was probably the first time in a very long time, decades even, where my mind was so stilled and I could finally just concentrate on one particular point and watch it manifest. One of the gifts we were given, and I think that really changed everything for me, was our professor brought in a couple of stones by the 2nd or 3rd day. His name was Daniel Doherty, and he's a wonderful man. I mean, everything about him was just so inspiring, and he was so engaging. And one lesson he taught us, or at least it was a reminder actually, was that if you're producing something so sacred, so important to you, you're really releasing a lot when you produce this work, then how dare you use synthetic paints? Or how can you not know a little bit more about the process and why and how alchemy works? And he immediately taught us how to grind stones and turn them into pigments. And because of my culinary background, I just happened to be, I guess, the most engaged and excited with raising my hand and can I help you? Can I stir this? Can I stir that? So I was that person. From there, I applied to Campus Art Dubai. It was the 8th iteration, and it was all about the symbiotic relationship between plants, animals, and minerals. And what I proposed to look at was actually my envy around having those 2 incredible weeks spent in London and then coming back to Dubai, and envious because it's not like I had a stream in Surrey where I could pick up yellow ochre and turn it into a stone. That didn't necessarily apply to my life in Dubai, but I did not want to be dismissive of it either. I really believe that now that I kind of had in me the formula of what alchemy is, plus my culinary background and my understanding of, for example, the spice souk, thanks to my time with Frying Pan Adventures, or going into different supermarkets, or finding little chemicals that can be paired with mushrooms from International City that could yield a fluorescent color. I turned these trips to the supermarket or global village into these acts of foraging, in a sense. What I ended up compiling and what you can see in this image is a grid of all the different colors I started to produce. And you can find them here as well. Stored very poorly. I learned the hard way that these colors are very transient. They have a life of their own. They're almost stains. I wouldn't even call them colors, but that was really part of the process. This embrace of a material and how it acts and reacts and what it presents us with. Now, when the work couldn't go on display as a sort of final outcome where I was going to have this illuminated manuscript that I was working towards that would have recipes and it would have all these outcomes, I also remembered a very important part of what I learned at the Princess School is something I find quite beautiful and not necessarily something I learned in my regular art degree, which was this idea that if you have knowledge about a certain subject, and this really applies to the traditional arts, is that you have to pass it over. You have to have an apprentice, and then that knowledge needs to be passed on again and again. And I was never protective over what I had learned. It was obviously given to me with so much generosity, but I mean, I played around with this idea of secrecy, but I also felt it was very important to try and find a way to reveal it as well. This is when I joined forces with my friend and someone whose work I'm very inspired by. Her name is Mehru Khan. She's a fashion designer. And both of us during lockdown had that experience of, you know, now that things are slower and now that we really, really have to think of ways to surrender, not just for our practices, but really for our mental health, we started exploring the idea of dyeing again. And this time she taught me a lot about applying what I had learned and what I had developed as colors and applying them to textile making. From there, we launched a workshop and a program called the Alchemy of Dying, which combines, it's honestly, well, I mean, Sarah, you participated and we might have some people in the audience who participated as well. It's like a 2-day vacation on everything that I love in a sense. We start off by visiting the spice souk and the Hindu temple alley where we collect marigold flowers. We then go back to my home. We have a meal that is cooked by me, but then the different materials get given back to the dye making process. We then sit and we create these colors together. We visit a park the next day because we don't visit parks often enough. We collect and we forage from there as well. And we end up with these textiles that are really capsules of the experience. Yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free.
We have like one question. Johan is asking, are the pigments steadfast?
So steadfast in the sense that are they like they can be problematic actually. They can be problematic depending on how you've grinded them, how you've filtered them, what binding agents you use as well. So again, the process is very similar to fermentation. It's if you have ever made an egg tempera, which you typically use to apply gold leaf onto a surface, that's one method as well. So what you really need is to cook down a color, make it as fine as possible, filter it, add a binding agent, store it really well, preferably in a cool, dark place, and then make sure that the paper or the textiles that you're using are appropriate for that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to last forever. So even in medieval manuscripts, for example, there's always a way of protecting them, but they even talk about how the color is continuously evolving. The beauty of natural paints and pigments is that they're still alive in a sense. They continue to just change and fade and rot sometimes as well. And that's really part of it. So I was all for just embracing the surprises in the outcome of each color.
Yeah, I would actually encourage for people that are interested in the Alchemy of Dying to check them out on Instagram. But also, I think ours was one of the last ones that they were doing in person for now, but they have an online bundle that you can purchase. And then most of the information is on there as well. So if you guys are interested, I could definitely put the link in the chat.
The work was due to be exhibited. There are a few complications with programming, but it will be an installation that maps out my encounters in the city, and you see their byproducts, which are these color logs and samples. So another project, as I said, that I just completed, and I see Altamash here. I think Dania was here as well, and a few participants from, oh, and Alia's here too, is Forsa School. Now, Forsa School was the result of a lot of conversations that I was having with several people during the lockdown. And I think this is again where my feelings of duty come in, or this absolute care for the community. I realized that my apocalyptic personality is to be a really, really severe empath to the point where I can get a bit overwhelmed and sensitive, but I'm also very good at fighting the fight, let's say, and being very resilient about making something happen. And this is one of them. After just seeing the different ways the art community was in trouble, so whether it was the fund with the ministry where there was an opportunity to apply for support, but then you had to show a license, and half the people here don't have a license when they practice art. So it was coming to terms with the things that were really difficult to comprehend. I was very fortunate to be in conversation with Rania Jeshi from Naft Critique, who had been compiling a list of everybody who had lost their opportunities during this time. We were together commissioned by Warehouse 421 to work on a social media campaign during Ramadan to showcase to almost give through social media an opportunity for these artists who were part of this database to just respond to a theme, but ultimately show what they do. But with that, and again, Rania's just as caring as me, it meant that we had about 40 conversations with these different people and really spent an hour with them thoroughly understanding where they were in terms of everything from their finances to mental health to feeling stuck and wondering and feeling just dark about everything. And so with that, I also was having similar conversations with Sharjah Art Foundation. Nawar and Noura are two colleagues. They're now the directors of Sharjah Art Foundation, but they have been my family, people I've been working with for years, and we were all sharing very, very similar frustrations and being quite vocal about it on social media. And so we sat together and produced what was Forsa School, which had a couple of resources. We have 25 public sessions and toolkits that will be released, inshallah, to the public very soon. We had private sessions and mentorships. And I also onboarded, the tutors that came in or the speakers that came in are brilliant people, but they're also people who were also impacted. So the model itself was really just trying to find a way to specifically arm the UAE community with really get down to the specifics of what was needed here. You need a license, this is where you go, specifically in Dubai. You need someone to revisit an agreement, this is the law firm that will help you with that, or this is how you negotiate. We spoke about money a lot. We spoke about discipline, about storytelling and positioning ourselves. We spoke about ways that we might not necessarily be able to exist within the institutional framework. If everyone's busy shutting down and our practices feel like they've been sidelined, then what else can you do as an artist, let's say? And anyone from Forsa School, again, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add to that before I move on.
Nahla, I remember like with our initial conversations, you were talking about building the system. So could you maybe just speak a little bit more about that? Because I felt that Forsa School was quite like a first of its kind in that major like impact and reaching out to the community. I was just wondering, did you know of anyone else that was doing something similar, even if it was like through a smaller impact, and you could share that with the audience?
I had worked on one project prior to this with Art Jameel. It was pretty brilliant, actually, and probably the first long-term critical program that I launched, and this was in Jeddah, so this was for high learning over there. And it was all about kind of creating a foundation for artists in Jeddah to really address or keep up to date with what it was they needed to understand about their community. I have to say, even with my experience with Campus Art Dubai, especially not necessarily, I mean, I was part of the last cohort, but I did participate in a lot of the community events that were taking place. There's another new platform called, I'm going to get this wrong, it's either Creative Gulf Collective or Gulf Creative Collective, one of those. And that you can find on Instagram. They're doing something quite similar in terms of having toolkits and speaking about specifics to the UAE. I'm trying to think as well. I mean, here's the thing, I feel like we are loaded with a ton of programs that help us speak about our work, and to be able to formulate a kind of vocabulary or currency around it, but not necessarily when it comes to navigating the professional world as artists as well. And we tried to get into those nuances with really no shame. In fact, we tried to be as honest as possible and as frank as possible about our vulnerabilities and the things that we were feeling. So things were shared from how much we've been getting paid on certain gigs to this is what happened to me, and not in a way to, you know, to criticize or discount, but really as a way to shed some myths around what was actually commonly happening to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because then that allows for others to also speak up a little bit and to normalize, like, yeah, artists not getting paid, or like having to chase after someone for like for money, or just for to be like socially engaged and represented. So yeah, I just felt like that was a really great initiative, and thank you for bringing that back up again.
I think also, I don't know about any of you, but earlier in March last year, I can't believe it's been a year, but I mean, I've felt guilty oftentimes about being in the art world without necessarily having an impact. Impact was everything to me. So it would become really hard sometimes when I'd look at budgets and know they could be allocated to things that could really genuinely help people, and it not be allocated to the right place. This comes from, again, I came from a place where you didn't have a lot of budgets, and yet there was so much that you could do just because we were doers and we were outspoken and angry and vocal about it. And one of the focus groups I participated in very early on, it was Muna Ayash actually, and I want to quote her because what she said was beautiful. And she just said that, like, I know we're sitting here talking about art and the future of like art and institutions, but honestly, all I want to do is be a good citizen right now. Like, the world is falling apart. And it kind of made me realize that, yeah, like I really need to spend my time making sure that everybody's okay. Even the work that I was doing with Frying Pan Adventures, I mean, although our tours did come to a halt, we transformed our model to make sure that the restaurants we were featuring, for example, their food was going to another database that we had compiled in the community of people who had lost their jobs completely, and funneling donations that way. So we found a way to work within these systems to set things up. If anyone has any questions around Forsa School, let me know, or any comments.
Are you going to be doing it every year, you think? Are you going to have like seasons? Are you going to continue?
We just had our meeting today for a 2.0. So definitely, and thanks to the first cohort, we know how we would like to tweak it and make it better, I hope.
I'm glad to hear that.
Okay. So my food life, how did I get into foods? Well, I grew up in a household. I mean, everyone likes to say that their mom is like the best cook in the world, but genuinely mine is. And I owe a lot of that to her. I also owe it to the fact that I got to watch a lot of travel and cooking shows and being really interested in them. I come from a bicultural household, so we've had Syrian food on the table, Levantine food, Jordanian, Palestinian, but also Bangladeshi, South Indian as well, and everything in between. And so when I moved here, one of the things I really missed out on actually was having home-cooked food. I relied way too much on takeout, way too much on chai karak. I gained those like chai karak 7 kilos until I realized that actually something needs to stop. But also there was something I noticed in my colleagues here, us living, leading these bachelor lives away from our families. We need a very anchoring pot of food to help us feel a little bit more grounded. I also felt like, for me, I was used to a home that was full of visitors, a daily thing where you just pop over at someone's house, you have a meal, you go to your grandmother's house, there are 20 people there, and there's that, you know, expectation and entitlement to their food and their labor. And when all my grandparents passed away and my mom, you know, like I guess most moms of her generation was, you know, quite feminist about this idea of no, you shouldn't be in the kitchen, you shouldn't be anywhere near it. But actually, I've been reading a lot about domesticity in this era and how it's this pushback against anxiety and moving back to a slow-paced sort of life where you're baking and making. And something that we've experienced a lot this year is our way of really grounding ourselves and trying to remind ourselves of how to survive. With that, I host supper clubs. If I'm not hosting supper clubs, I do food deliveries. The menus are ever changing. They're very contextual in the sense that I just think about, you know, things I experienced on a frying pan tour or a new supermarket that I visited with really interesting ingredients. I work with seasonality, the farmer's market, and I find ways to make dishes that are wholesome, that look at several things. So they oscillate between my emotions, a little bit of nostalgia, a Black Mirror episode that's playing in the background, and not necessarily a food blogger's approach to it, but my approach, of course, there's alchemy involved in the sense that I'm almost having a conversation with the different materials or ingredients I have. My cooking practice also came from the fact that I didn't have a studio space for the longest time, but for somebody who's very attached to using their hands, my studio ultimately became the kitchen, and I experiment probably most frequently with that. So these are just...
You speak a little bit more about like what alchemy is and how that infiltrates to the many different practices?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whenever I ask anyone the question of like, what do you know of alchemy? Other than Paulo Coelho's book on alchemy, it's a loaded word, and I probably shouldn't be using it too loosely, but it's ultimately the practice of combining spirituality, your personal energy, with materials around you. It's the idea of elevating or transforming a material and using elements of chemistry, of like the lunar cycle, for example, so elements of nature and cycles, a material, and then you. And I mean, I mentioned in one of my earlier slides about having a spiritual practice. I mean, I don't really talk about it a lot, but I've been working in the realms of energy healing for an extremely long time. But actually, or probably as early as my childhood, really, when I look back, because my ability to not sound airy-fairy, but my connection to plants and animals and the things around me has been extremely sensitive, but also the things that aren't tangible either are things that I notice a lot. And so that is brought into the practice of making and turning the state of an object or a material from one state into another. The most famous alchemists, let's say, or where that word has been used a lot, is those who are able to turn metal into gold. So giving a metal its highest value.
Thank you.
Now, I don't often illustrate a lot, but when I do, I enjoy this. And this was commissioned to me by Nasrallah, who produced an anthology. He does this, I think, every year now. It's called Corniche. So it's a compilation of illustrators and comic book artists that are based in the UAE to put together an anthology. And so him having been a previous colleague of mine, and he was someone who I used to feed actually at Sharjah Art Foundation. I would make him meals along with a lot of my colleagues. He immediately said that what you need to be working on is a set of recipes. And again, when it comes to writing recipes in a non-conventional way, and something that I really should get to publishing, it is really everything. It is not just about, you know, taking tomatoes and watermelons and peppers, but it's also really thinking about the things that are going on in the background, how long things are waiting, observing how the brutality of your actions as well when you're chopping and grinding what you're ultimately doing to a material. And so my recipes kind of zoom in on those little details as well. So with the labneh, I guess you can kind of read it out. Labneh is very cathartic to watch, because what you're doing to yogurt is you are separating the whey from the curds, and you kind of leave it overnight and weight it down. And so it just produces this whey at the bottom, and so you've separated two ingredients to just turn it into another. So it was really shedding light on those points. This is another page from that book. So that book is also available, and it was recently launched at Focal Points. Lastly, great, okay, good, we're on time. So lastly, I also work with ceramics. This is a practice that I got introduced to a little bit later in life, and it has had me going back to a lot of the work that I produced in college. In university, I was constantly producing these biomorphic environments as a way to almost mourn the loss of not being in the countryside, but to also create a controlled environment for me to navigate. Again, I absolutely love ceramics because it's again this idea of working with a material that can be quite unforgiving sometimes. You don't really have control over the outcomes, the glazes, but to some degree that you do, and it's almost this conversation that happens. I've also produced a few functional things, so it's also had me kind of going back to my thinking of food and the different ways that we can eat and enjoy certain dishes. So these are, I call them creatures of the morning, and they were commissioned by a friend of mine. And it was just this idea of really celebrating the idea of a morning cup of coffee, but almost holding it powerfully. And these were inspired by goblets that you would see in Roman times, for example, and this idea of what it meant to almost drink out of a vessel that felt a little bit grander, but also very challenging to drink out of as well. I'm also part of Sif's cohort this year, and one thing I'm looking at exploring is just to further my my engagement with alchemy, with botany, and with food. So that's where I am right now. And yeah, you can contact me here. My website will launch in a few days, but otherwise feel free to email me or follow me. And again, if you have any questions, please, I can stop sharing my screen actually.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That would be great. All right, thank you so much, Nahla. Thank you for your time and just like being so generous with your sharing your practice and your time and your effort, and like thank you for being a part of this season. So yeah, I just wanted to start with a question, and then if anyone else would like to jump in or even just like write it down in the chat, I'll get to it. But you started off by saying that people ask you how you can do so much at the same time. And I was wondering, do you consider everything that you presented today and more to be one wholesome art practice, or do you still kind of divide your time and your mind to these separate projects?
So I had to really resolve this, right? Especially because I was giving so much time to these different practices. And not to sound, again, it's very loaded to say this, but I do feel like the same artist soul is working through all these things. Like this same intention is there throughout all the work that I do. So yes, it took me a while to resolve it because it's not been very conventional. It's not necessarily work that necessarily goes on display or navigates its way through being part of an institution, but it's definitely there. So I think it's also about unlearning modes of exhibiting, of practice. This is maybe the second artist talk I ever give. So it was quite daunting for me, but I had a lot of help. Kevin Jones, I owe a lot to him actually for really sitting down and helping me believe in myself and resolve a lot of these issues. But we spent a good 5 months with him helping me flesh out why I need to be confident that all these things are part of that.
Right, and when we spoke earlier, you said you weren't giving yourself enough credit for the ceramic pieces or like the illustrations, and like could you just talk a little bit more about like what drew you to those materials perhaps over other mediums, and is that something you're also currently working on? Will you continue working with them? Yeah.
I think the more complex you get, or the more you overthink, you honestly forget sometimes to just enjoy the aspect of making as a practice. And eventually, if making work is kind of not prioritized anymore, then that's a real shame, because it's kind of difficult to find your way back to it. But sometimes you literally want to just feel a sense of tactility and not more. And I think coming to terms with that or saying that out loud is very difficult. Also, the fact that I've been working for so long, so I've been an employee more than anything else, which meant that I had to dedicate a lot of my time and a lot of my brain power and thoughts to these different companies and different institutions that I worked with. So it's almost as though I know the creative problem solving is there, but it's not necessarily been applied to work that is just authored by me. But now that I see these things as collaborations and extensions of me, it's sort of flipped narrative a little bit.
We have a question from Jafat Al-Aqlam. Sarah, if you'd like to unmute and ask the question.
Don't be shy, Halla, and tell me you're shy and stuff, because you're not.
You're going to be up here, so let's go.
Hi. Hi. Of course, I've always wanted to ask this, بس طبعا دائما أستحي. It's mostly about the time management, because mashallah, you've been doing like so many things, and I always admire you for that. But as I grow older, I feel time management is not a real concept, because it just does not make sense when everything around you is just absolute chaos. It doesn't matter how much you manage, it just does not turn out, because there are so many external factors that you never put into consideration, or you never thought, yeah, Corona, example, simple example. You never thought Corona was going to happen. Like no one would have thought that our lives will completely change. So the question is, does it depend on like, is it like, do you have days for specific things, or do you divide your day for specific things, or whatever feels the practice, yani whatever calls out for that specific time?
You asked me my favorite question.
Nice. Thank you.
So, I come from a family that's extremely disciplined. So that's one thing where I feel, even though I wasn't disciplined, I was around people that were and had a lot of expectations about me getting up and doing what I needed to do. But it wasn't until my IB exams, so my last 2 years of high school, and I don't know if any of you get this, because I still have nightmares about my high school exams, even though they're like way gone. But the anxiety of like time management or forgetting something, I think I'll never forget. And one thing that I formalized there, which I now realize is actually a lot of what self-management books and bullet journaling methods are talking about, is this idea of allocating time and spreading things around. And, you know, I was ranked, and this is not to sound like, oh wallah, Nahla was so academically excellent at school, but I think I was ranked 8th out of like 80 students. Okay, so I was in the top percentile or whatever that is. And I'm telling you, it had nothing to do with how much I knew. It's just that I had given enough time to know the things that I had done, and I selected the subjects that were appropriate to me. So I took on things that really, really mattered to me. Now, in terms of how I do things, I'm going to give you my realistic philosophy, but also my energy philosophy. In energy healing, one of the things they tell you is that time, as we measure it, is a man-made concept, okay? So we invented the minute, we invented the clock. But if you look at how nature tells time, then you have two parameters. And you have the sun and the moon kind of telling you how things operate, okay? And the way animals and plants react is based on that timeline. Now, it also says that you kind of need to look at time in a way that's less linear, in the sense that you have to imagine all the things that you do and sort of imagine that you can bend time, because technically you can, because technically you invented time, we invented time. And so every day I do spend a bit of time going through my timeline. I visualize every single hour of the day, and I slot my tasks into that time. And I consider them done. So I don't necessarily get delayed. I don't necessarily run out of things to do. Or run out of time, because time is always on my side, because I invented time. Does that make sense? On a grounded level, to answer your question, there's been a lot of people trying to distinguish, and multitasking is so bad for you. and you shouldn't be multitasking. And then others celebrating the martyr who multitasks and is always frazzled. It's about multi-compartmentalizing. So yes, I do 100 things in a day, but they are things that are sort of combined. So in the day that I need to photograph a bunch of stuff, I will photograph all my projects in one day. So that is like 1 hour photo shooting, editing, I get everything out, I do that. I need to go out in my car and I need to shop for a supper club, I'll combine it with my personal shopping and other food shopping that I have to do. So I'm actually incredibly impatient, which is why I put these systems together, because I actually hate my time being wasted. And as a result, of course, I kind of also just map things out really well. So it's really about just visualizing and plotting and planning. Altamash saw like one of my journals, my dear diary where I like spill all my thoughts and feelings and dark emotions. And it's kind of shocking because it's actually like maps and lists. So even when I try to express my emotions, like, oh, my heart's broke, I put it down in a list, or like, and then there's a to-do list of how to get through it. And so everything is based on instructions and maps. I hope that answered your question, Sarah. But I can
now. I don't know what to do. But I love the whole visualizing thing, and you're putting a lot of things that are sort of similar to like one task. So كلهم يمشوا مع بعض.
Yeah, you have to be practical about it. And I get that time is against us, and I get that we have full-time jobs, but sometimes I feel like because we have so much going on, you hold on to the time. مثلا you do جفت الأقلام at the odd hours of the night, right? I think you hold on to that more because it's an odd hour in the night. You really appreciate that.
That's awesome.
You have a question as well. So as someone trying to come to terms with defining myself as an artist, how, at what point did you own up to that? Was there a specific moment where it clicked? Oh, yeah, that's a great one as well, because again, I need to say, hi, I'm an artist, that's what I do all day, is something that has such loaded connotations. And you know, it works when we are in an environment like this and we can say it, but the amount of times in my real life that it often gets dismissed or misunderstood, or I'm the token like strange friend amongst my school friends, mathalan, or the eccentric one, or it's so tough to come to terms with it because of what it means. And I think that's why I've been comfortable in slotting it with other roles that I have in my life. That's kind of made it better. Now, do I feel like I need to commit to the term specifically? No. There's a really good book. She's called The Jealous Curator. I can't see her name from afar, but it's called Your Inner Critic is Being a Jerk. And it really unpacks the psychology around creative blocks, your inner critic, and the doubts that you have. And one chapter that I absolutely loved was titled Labels Are for Canned Peaches, and the ideas that, you know, these terms were made by other people, but if they don't necessarily apply to what you do, then why should you why should you be applying them or using them? Why should you confine yourself to that when you're so much broader? So to come to terms with defining myself just in general, and not even through the word artist, but many things, it took a lot of time and confidence. One thing I would suggest is perhaps make a list. Again, I'm gonna go back to lists, but structure it so that you've kind of made a list of everything that you've done and that you've accomplished, and then looking at it from a sense of what role you played in that. And I think sometimes the mind, yes, I'm obsessed with lists too, but I think sometimes the mind just needs to see it like as tangible data, let's say, or outcomes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What drives me to create? In what realm, Altamash? Like in all realms, or like is it a specific one?
Well, we can focus on either. I'm very interested in the dying stuff. Why? I mean, beyond, like, someone like me would not come up with a reason beyond I just like the way it looks, and that is a valid reason to pursue anything, really. But I just want to know what kind of drives you to expend your creative energy in these specific, like, why? I mean, I know why the food. You did tell us about your history, etc., so that does make sense. If you grew up around gardens, of course you want it, but then to keep incorporating it in your work, expressing yourself through these mediums of food and alchemy, etc. Why? I mean, I understand why you're choosing the mediums, but what's driving you to connect with these mediums over and over again? What motivates you to continue working with them and loving them?
So I'm a sucker for anything with a process. I love watching, for example, cooking shows or watching things transform. So I would say that's one of them. It's kind of the elevated experience of watching something transform from one state to another. It's also the fact that these things have such surprise outcomes. So there's a lot of surrendering involved. And I think from perhaps a mental health or a cathartic point of view, it is absolutely a way of training me to be less clods on things and a little bit kinder and more embracing of surprises and outcomes. So I would say it's that as well. And again, I don't see them as very different to a culinary practice, let's say, or a ceramics practice. In the end, they're very sensory, and that's probably something that I need to feel more oftentimes than not.
If anyone else has, I think we can take one more question before we end it, and if not, then.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Nahla. How are you? This is Jawahir here.
Hi.
Quick. So Nahla, my question is basically when it comes to mapping things out, do you think like the mapping process when it comes to discovery, do you map things out looking forward or looking backward, for example?
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's a really interesting perspective.
I would say both, because in order to map a place, I would probably start by looking forward, but then I would recover and retrace and go through that process again. I want to say though, something that I don't speak about a lot, but even my evolution with mapping is a pretty important one. I experienced a bit of trauma like earlier in my life, and so mapping a city for me was actually about me navigating security. So I had to kind of watch, like, is this harmful? Is this not? Is this a predator? Is this not? Is this person walking down the street going to do, like, it was always about how do I bypass? How do I hide? How do I jump? What is a safe place? What is not? And my mind was constantly working in overdrive. So, and living in London actually really forces you to be a very active planner and an understander of how the city works in order to make your, let's say, your commute or whatever you're doing so much more efficient. So I would start by saying that I came from that, actually, if anything. So adapting to a city was one, but feeling safe was another. So I was also working with like a survival instinct that was extremely heightened as well.
Thank you so much. Just I wanted to elaborate on that question. I mean, when it comes like to mapping, I think it's sometimes, especially if we map to reflect or map, do you think the registration aspect of mapping takes a lot from our mind and mental power when it comes like to being in the moment? Like we're always like rushing to map that out, or يعني I find myself always drawing arrows around things, and I'm so visual as well. Like even in universities, all the students used to take my notes because everything were made like in maps. So basically, but I used to feel it takes a lot from me being and living in the moment and being with the teacher. Sometimes يعني it will help actually make me register the thing, but sometimes I'm so busy registering,
I think it's then a case of using different methods to map, right? So we talked about one, which is your outcome of mapping is because you have a process that needs to be documented, right? So in a sense, you're archiving. Hala, I just spoke about like a heightened anxiety type of mapping where you're just there to survive versus an efficient way of mapping. But then if you could revisit those processes or apply sort of a slower or maybe a more thoughtful way of taking a walk or a stroll, then things become very different, right? But in this day and age, like even the privilege of like walking and wandering is so it's so not applicable in our day-to-day lives, which is why, for example, in the Alchemy of Dying workshops, we felt it was really important to just go to a park and sit. So even though it's orchestrated, there's a time limit, we're only there for a little bit, it's also a little bit like, haram, we have to engineer like this time to just like do that. But in terms of mapping, I would also say that wandering is one way to do it. So maybe having a beginning and an end, but surrendering yourself to what happens in between. Scavenging, so having perhaps like a list or guidelines or a set of things that you need to do and working loosely around that. And I wanted to say as well, Vikram, you're here. I'm sorry to call you out, but if you are here at all, I have been really a big admirer of your work, and you're one of the people who's inspired me a lot to think about certain elements of I guess having something like having a duty around being critical in the urban environment, but also using different methods of making and collecting and mapping to kind of express that. So I don't know if you have anything to add, but if you do, please do. Not to put you on the spot, Yani, but.
Yeah, I think I have a lot to add, which I think I will expand on at the next session. But yeah, great to hear about your work. I haven't actually known a lot about your work, but lovely to hear your process and how you also merge different disciplines and don't see them as disparate. I really appreciate that that approach, that it's not a fractured or it's not classified. And yeah, I guess as you spoke about your endeavors, they all are the one thing, I really like that about how you go about things.
Thank you. So Vikram's also going to be part of the Artist Talk series, and I think Balqis is here as well.
And Jameel is here, Salma Ahmed is here too. Great support.
Yeah.
What are these Artist Talk series, and like where can we keep updated to make sure we don't miss any, etc.? I only found out about this because Nahla posted it on its stories.
Oh, well, on my Instagram, I have a post for the 9 artists that are going to be part of this season from March to June, every other Monday. So if you'd like to follow me on Instagram, I'll put my account name down here. And the timing will change during Ramadan, but it is usually at 7 p.m. And I have the dates written down there as well.
We also have perhaps something to conclude with, which is what Duha is saying. So I once read that artists are compelled to long processed works as a mechanism to slow down time and our experience of time in relation to our fast-paced life today. That's absolutely it. There's a lot of that in it, but it's also, you know, there's a little bit of a critical element to having a slow-paced or a long process is this idea of privilege and being able to have the time to be able to do that, but also the sustainability of something like that too, like who are you making it for, why are you making it, what are the risks of it being a kind of indulgent practice, and a really good book on this. Yeah, now all my books have disappeared, but I can share it in the after notes. It was something like embracing domesticity, something about domesticity and today, oh wait, no, I haven't, okay, sorry. I'll stand up and get this because I think it would be quite helpful. It's called Homeward Bound, and Moza, I think we've had this discussion about the book before, why women are embracing the new domesticity. So it looks at, again, like this era of anxiety, kind of the connections that people are forming. So whether you're, it's very, it's based on the states, but it looks at how liberals and conservatives, atheists and evangelicals, Mormon moms and radical queers, and rural poor and the urban rich all have a commonality around this idea of why we're working together. It looks at the idea of the emergence of the hipster homemaker and how domesticity is appealing to a generation of mothers unhappy with the workplace, this idea of DIY parenthood, what does that mean? It looks at bloggers and the rise of domestic chic. So all these are all things that, at least in the last decade, have been very apparent, but it also draws parallels between many different eras where this was going on as well. So the 80s was a big time for that, for example, where you were taught to embrace being the working woman, but also like you had to be just equally as great at doing stuff at home. And actually, Moza, I mean, your project with attempting Abla Nazila was like a response to that as well. If you would like to tell us more, I think this is a good time to chime you in. Again, sorry for putting you all on the spot, but a good conversation.
I will not turn my video on though, because I'm in my bedroom. But so Nahla told me about this book and she was a guest on Attempting Abla Nazila, a project between me and Marwa bin Halim. Long story.
Moza, we lost you.
Yeah. The voice cut. Is she still on the call though?
It's cut off. I'm back.
Okay. Hi.
Sorry, I'm gonna keep this super concise, but basically I think I spoke about this in my talk with you, Sarah, which is I think up on YouTube.
Yes.
So and since then, Nahla, I think I've been just trying to talk about this book with anyone who wants to talk about it, because it's very US centric, and I think we can draw so much from it, from like what's going on regionally and a bit more like in a bit more localized way. So this is just a call for anyone who's gonna get this book to just get in touch with me and Nahla and just like form a group so we can talk about this like insane return to domesticity.
I think it's also a great transition, possibly to end this talk, but we're gonna open a room on Clubhouse for anyone that's on there to continue the conversation. It's less daunting than having your camera on. It's just voice. It's just gonna be your voice if you'd like to speak. And the topic of discussion is gonna be, what is the role of the artist beyond making? which is something that Nahla touched upon during her presentation today. And Moza, if you'd also like to talk about the text, or if anyone else that's going to be joining the room has read it, we can also touch upon that as well. So I'll be creating a room soon, but I just wanted to officially end the first episode of the second season of Artist Talks, and check out, I'm putting Nahla's Instagram, email, and website, which is going to be up in a few days for anyone that is interested. And then my Clubhouse name is just my name, Sara Al-Mahiri. For anyone that would.
Sarah, you need, is the event on, or do you need, like, is there a link that you're supposed to send, or how does this work?
If you follow me and follow Nahla, then the room will be created, and then we can also ping anyone else that would like to join. So yeah, thank you all. And if you have any more pressing questions, feel free to reach out to me or Nahla. And the next talk is going to be on March 15, and I will be announcing the artist next week. And if you'd like to look back at this recording, it'll be posted in 1 week's time on Monday.
I recommend you visit all the recordings actually on Sarah's channel. It's been wonderful. I know Moza gave a talk. I wonder who else here in the audience has also given a talk prior to this. But yeah, Sarah, thank you so much. And I hope I did you justice. And yeah, I'll see you in Clubhouse.
Yeah.
And thank you everybody for attending and listening to my little stories.
Thank you all, and hope you have a really great evening. And please do join us if you can. See you all.
Yeah. Bye.